Hey, everybody, welcome to Beyond the Booth, Northeast Alabama Community College edition here with Coach Joe Guthrie. I'm the Howard Changer along with Phil Harrison, and of course, the star of the show and our guest, Coach Joe Guthrie. Coach, I don't know if you can be a star and a guest at the same time, but I just promoted you as one, so there you go.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate you guys having me on.
You're not going to get paid twice for that. I can promise you that. So just because you got two titles, you're not going to get paid twice. But Coach, you finish up your fall season this week at home. Uh, Tell us what you're looking forward to on that.
Well, we've got some things. We're going to do this a little differently. We're playing a really good travel team, Arizona Storm. It's coached by Chris Walding, who has a daughter, Sierra Walding, that's on our team. That's a really strong organization overall, based out of Phoenix. And it allows us a couple things. The recruiting is a big bit. Where there's some kids that we've recruited off that roster, and it allows us to see them. It's one of the unique things you can do in junior college is to have them right out there in front of you. They're getting ready to go into the big Scenic City tournament in Chattanooga Friday, Saturday, Sunday, which is one of the best in the country, and we're fortunate to have that geography kind of in our favor. And so that gives them some work too. And then in addition to that, for us, we're doing it a little differently. We're going to play 10 innings, but we're scripting the innings. So some of them will be, your traditional, vanilla innings. And then others will be, we may start off with a first and third or a bases loaded. There are some late game scenarios that we didn't do as well as I would like to. We were playing live against some four-year schools. We've been working on that this week. Still got what we call a countdown inning, where we've got a lead, with let's say it's within a run, and we've kind of played with fire. We've been successful at times closing it out, but not you want to be 1, 2, 3 and done. We're letting leadoffs on late a little bit too often, and we're continuing to work through that at practice. We're going to get another shot to do that this week. So, those are good opportunities for us to improve. And we've just got to keep working it and get better in those scenarios for sure.
Sounds good. And while we're kind of on the subject, the game is Thursday. Is that correct?
It is. We're going to start at 1:00. As of now, it looks like, you never know scheduling this late, how weather sometimes can go. It looks like the weather is going to be on our side, which is a positive. Anytime, unless you're in Southern California, South Florida or, Arizona, for example, past October 15th, the weather can get interesting. So, we can go, until about November 15th, in terms of doing these types of scrimmages. So we wanted to throw in late. The other thing is too, obviously when we open in February with our spring season, it's going to be cold. So, most of the weather we've had, well, really all of it, up until this point has been really good. And, it'll do us some good to, play under some adverse conditions. Not that it's going to be 30 degrees, but it'll be a little cooler. And that's good for us, I think, from an environment standpoint to have a taste of that. And it's good for us to be back home. We haven't done that since September. So, all of those things are things that we'd like to get some work. We're going to, use our entire roster and get some looks before, it'll be 90 days before we see another opponent of any kind. So that, that's good as we work into our, our winter, kind of our winter conditioning and individual period, which will start Monday after we get done.
One more thing about the game coming up Thursday, and we'll turn it over to Phil, is you're playing 10 innings. Are you going to play a doubleheader, or is it just going to be the 1 10-inning game?
It'll just be straight through 10 innings. Like I said, they've got, and I'm glad they're going to do it that way. We're probably taxing them as much as we can. We need to get some looks from some kids, but we want to be mindful of them as well, because I don't know how many games they'll play this weekend, but a lot of times it's at least 6. I would guess. So that's a lot. On top of playing us, but it gives us a chance for those kids to see what we're all about, and and see campus. We're going to have a couple of organizations that are going to come through before, they go to Scenic City. So, the geography of it is really advantageous for us to, kind of wrap up the fall and get right into recruiting as well. So all those are positives.
Phil, it sounds like it's going to be a big day at Northeast. Harvard on the Hill, as it used to be called, out there at the Northeast come Thursday at 1:00.
Yeah, it'll be nice to see. Hopefully I can get out that way. I'm going to try to plan to. Well, Coach, I want to, and you were speaking of cold weather, and I hadn't thought about this, but I've thought about, how you deal with this during the season when it's cold weather. What are some of the things you do in preparation to where the young ladies are not focused on the cold? Because it's cold. We know it. You know it. They do it a lot of standing around in the field. What are some of the things you do to try to get their mind off? Hey, I'm cold.
Well, it's one of the things I learned from Jimmy Colitis when I was an assistant under him. We opened up at Georgia Tech in 2020, right before everything got shut down, and we ended up beating them. And it was unexpected at UAB. And, one of the things that I think factored into that, Jimmy made a point, and we had done this all January. It was really cold that January leading up to that game. That was our opening game that year. And, we had that mindset. The first thing is you have to decide that you're not cold. And, they had heaters in there. It's a Power 4 place. They've got all that kind of stuff. We have that stuff too at Northeast. But one of the things he pointed out to the team was they were all huddled around the heaters, before we got into pregame. And he said, we're not going to do that. I'm not saying you guys can't layer up and be warm, but, we're not going to create a mindset where we're kind of being the victim here to the cold weather. And, our kids kind of took that and ran with it. And that was something that we had reinforced in practice as well. So, even though we've got a nice indoor, we try to get out there, within reason as much as we can. We're not going to be out there, when it's 25 degrees, but, we want them to be in that environment. Obviously the indoor allows us to do some things that keep us safe. But it's a mindset, being out there, for my kids, I'm really not a huge fan of when it's below 65 degrees, not to have something on your arm. Knock on wood, we have not had an arm injury of any real substantial value since 2009 that's taken somebody out and taken them under the knife. We spend a lot of time on arm care. So those things are factored into what we're going to do. But it's something we're going to talk about and work through, on practice for sure. But it starts with a mindset. A lot of teams will lose games in the cold before the game starts. It's so cold, I don't want to practice, I don't want to be there, blah, 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 blah. And I think you're kind of setting yourself up for failure. And, fortunately on this staff, Courtney spent 10 years at Northwestern and she grew up in Arizona. I spent 4 years in Pennsylvania. I grew up in Alabama. Jimmy spent, 5 years in Oregon. He's from Alabama. So we've had a lot of experience in not so great weather. And that's the best way that I know to deal with it because, people always used to ask me when I was in Pennsylvania, they'd say, how you deal with the cold? And there's no doubt it's cold. However, the worst 4 or 5 weekends, typically we were somewhere else, Arizona, California, Florida, which isn't bad. If you're here, in Alabama, Tennessee, Mississippi, Georgia, yes, it is warm enough to play, but it's not Florida. So, you've got to adapt to that. I used to tell our coaches all the time when I was at Penn State, I'm like, don't go to Alabama or Mississippi. It's it's warmer in here because, in Penn State, there were a couple years where the snow would start falling in October and it was cold enough to where it would stay there and you didn't see really fresh ground, uninhabited by snow until about the first day of April. So, it's obviously that's not the case here, but it is cold. So that's something we've got to talk about and prepare and get in that environment as much as we can to have success and be prepared for it for sure.
Yeah, and speaking of that, that's like, for instance, even a program like the Lady Vols, they will usually spend about the first 3 weeks of their season out on a West Coast trip. They'll play somewhere like Arizona, and then they'll play 2 tournaments before they'll have 12 or 13 road games before they'll ever come home and play their first home game. Because in wintertime, it's cold in Knoxville.
It is. And that's something you've got to, you definitely have to schedule, in the infancy of college baseball and college softball, there was a reason, before the game really, really got popular and national in both of those sports, there was a reason why you saw a lot of dominance on the West Coast, and a lot of that had to do with weather. Those guys were out in it all the time. Historically, there's been a ton of players in both sports, from Florida, Arizona, California. A lot of that has to do with that, the weather, being outside. Obviously we've considerably closed the gap, in the last 5 to 10 years, prospect wise, in the Southeast. When I first started, if you didn't go to California recruiting, you were crazy. I still think you've got to go out there some, but, we have definitely closed the gap around here. The tournament this weekend is a good example. You'll have every college you can imagine there. I was at Georgia High School State Championships this past weekend. It looked a lot like a travel ball national event. Coaches from all the big conferences, in addition to local ones. So, I think that speaks volumes for where the sport has gone, from a regional standpoint. It was unheard of when I first started, in 2007. There weren't many schools that were coming into the state of Alabama to get players. Now it's routine. You'll see coaches from all over the country. Certainly that's the case in Tennessee and Georgia as well. So, I think that's where things have evolved a little bit. And, we're real fortunate to be in good geography where, in a 1, 2, 3, 4 hour radius, there are a lot of players, which, is going to help us for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So, well, Coach, I want to get back focused on your team. And I know you had talked about the last time you were on the expectations for this team. You want to win a national championship. You want to compete for a conference championship. And, and naturally those are realistic goals. But in turn, you've got to dream it, you've got to believe it, and you've got to live it, or it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I've just never, one of the thoughts when we first came was we thought, this is the kind of commitment that Dr. Campbell and Nathaniel Ledbetter and, the state had put forth in starting this program demands that. I mean, they're doing this first class. They want to get the best coaches. They want to get the best players. They want to have the best resources for all those people involved. So, I've heard people say, oh, you left from the SEC to go to junior college, and that's an easier deal. It's not. It has a different grind, but we're turning players in and out of here all the time. Not that different these days from the 4-year level, but we're incentivized to develop them. So for us, it doesn't really matter the level. What it takes to win, especially be elite and win a national title, it doesn't really change that much. And, you go look at the history of NJCAA softball and go look at who's won national championships in the last 30 or 40 years. You see some pretty impressive names like Mike Candrea or Clint Myers or, people of that, of that ilk that started there and maybe carried that on at Division I later on at the NCAA level. But, it's, what it takes is what it takes. It's still college softball. I think we saw that a little bit this fall and, being able to, punch out of our weight class and still compete and win. So, those are all things that, you've got to be able to do. And we've got to continue to do those things at a high level every day. I mean, one of the things that's a challenge for us right now is just freshmen understanding that, even though we're winding down the fall and we may not be playing Georgia Tech this weekend, it doesn't matter. We're still playing to our standard. It shouldn't matter if we're playing whoever the jersey is. You've got to play to a high standard or you're going to get beat. One of the things that comes out of that and inversely is there's a lot of the same right now in college athletics. I mean, you're seeing that in football. If you go to sleep and it happens to say Alabama across your chest, you may get beaten by somebody that's not as good. It's the same way with us. I mean, I wouldn't say anybody slept on us this fall, but if we play well and they don't play that well, we may beat them. And that works both ways. That works both ways. That can happen to us. So you got to be very diligent. I think with the parity that you've got in all levels of college athletics, you've got to train every day to the standard, and you can't take days off. So that's something we're trying to get across. It's a tough message, with those guys coming in because of a lot of what their background is now is, like I've mentioned before, is all calibrated towards showcase and getting a scholarship, and not a lot of the little things that you've got to do to win. So, and they don't come with a lot of practice experience. So those are things that we've got to continue to be diligent on throughout the process.
Well, of course, I know coaches, used to, there was a lot of focus on, naturally you want to know what the other team's doing. But nowadays, a lot of the thing is to focus on you, focus on your team, focus on what you do well. Because if you don't do the things that you do well, you're not going to win.
There's no doubt. I think that's, for me, any great coaches I've been around, played for, coached under, and I've been fortunate to be around some really, really good ones. That's always been the case. I think it sticks out more now because it's Grand Central Station in recruiting now. People are going and coming, so anybody can get rich quick and be really good. And if you're going off tradition, or you're going off, what they did last week, that doesn't really concern me. We know what we need to do to win, and we know what the game tells us to do. Example in Game 6 the other day in that really good World Series, the Blue Jays get doubled off on a lazy liner to left. I mean, those are things you don't see happen very often in the past. And I think I've said on this program, I know I've said it publicly before, I had a friend's the base running coordinator at the major league level, and he was talking about, they had it down to a fixed number of how many more base running mistakes, that organization was making in the last 5 years, if you compare it to the 5 years previous to that. And, one of the things that he brought up was, our teach was the same, but we're not accounting for what they don't know coming here. And that's, that's a byproduct of 30 years on the baseball side of, showcase first, and situational knowledge second, third, or fourth. So I think that's part of what you see a little bit more. The analytics, unfortunately, has, moved things a little more towards what I would say is at times an individual-based mindset, even though, the team-based mindset still comes into play. If you can't bunt, if you can't field, if you can't, get leadoff hitters out with a lead late, you're not going to be very successful. And that was true 150 years ago, and it's true now. So, these are things that we have to spend a lot more time on than we used to, because it's just not there and it's not taught. But, that's a challenge that, we definitely accept as coaches, and you got to grind through it and keep at it for sure.
Yeah, definitely understand that. Well, Coach, I want to ask you about, okay, now that the season's over with, I'm sure, do you and Courtney and Jimmy kind of sort of evaluate each individual player and express to them maybe some of the things they need to work on in the off season, focus on what they have done well and not slip on those things? Do y'all kind of evaluate each one and kind of give them a map of what to work on in the off season?
We do. That starts broadly, in the fall. We're teaching a lot of, we'll do some individual concepts so they understand the bare bones of the system. And then that kind of morphs into what we're doing as a team, within our system. We had meetings last week that gave them kind of a general snapshot of the fall. And then what we're headed into next week is some really, really, player development refinement, where we're really working on exactly where we're not good, or what we are doing well. We call those sustains and improves. And so obviously there's some sustains that we want to keep good. And, on the improved side, we want to make the weaknesses better. A lot of that comes into what we will morph their individual training plans based on the data that we've gathered in the fall. And we'll continue to gather data, in the winter. And fortunately, we're really well set up to do that with some of the tech we have, video measures that we have. This is the time, really from November to February where we can really close the gap and make some players better. But again, that's practice is a part of it. If they're not doing anything outside of practice, that's going to slow that process, or hurt it. So, we want to make sure that we're building that as well, that we're focused on, really precisely doing what we need to do to get better and eliminate the clutter, because there's a lot of clutter these days with a lot of people in their ear. That one of the biggest mistakes people make, and I've said this before, is, well, this is what I did, in high school, and this is what I did here. Well, there may be some kernels of truth to that, but this is a different level. A lot of our kids have understood that really quickly because of the schedule we played in the fall. So we got to make sure that we give them some freedom, to be in charge of their own plan, but also at the same time, make sure that we're all driving in the same direction toward development. So, that takes, starting with meetings, being real precise in, where we are on our sustains and improves, and then rolling from there.
Yeah, because jumping from high school to college, in high school, you're the star of the team most of the time. You're one of the better players, and sometimes fundamentals can lax a little bit. You don't focus on them quite as much. When you get to that college level, you've got to learn to be specialized and detailed in your position, or your playing time will lax.
Yeah, and you see a lot of that. This weekend was interesting. I was telling some of our players before practice today. I went to the Georgia High School State Championships, which is really good. You see where the little things are accentuated and players are, focused on getting a bunt down or making the right base running read, because everything matters when you're trying to win a state title. And then, in that same weekend, I rolled up to a travel, which is a showcase tournament. Some of the same players that I'd seen that day or within 24 hours in a championship setting at the high school level are now showcasing at, 100 miles down the road at another showcase, and you don't see it as much. The other thing is too, with a lot of the travel ball, let's say you have 2 or 3 really good players on the team, and then you have, another 10 that are just okay, and which you didn't used to see in the travel ball level. 10 years ago, there'd be 12 or 13 that are pretty close together. One of the things that's fortunate on our team is there's not a lot of difference between player 1 and player 25, which, regardless of what kind of coaching job we do, that makes our job a lot easier, in the sense that everybody's competing all the time. I mean, on our team, I don't care who it is. If you don't think somebody's breathing down your neck, then you're not looking at it the right way. And I think most of them understand that, and that makes your team better. And I think a lot of those kids, if you're the top 2 or 3, and then there's a drop off on the team because there's so many teams and so many tournaments now, I think that hurts development, because you're not going to be pushed. It's like I tell all my kids when they go home, I'm like, if somebody is not in there, if you're not doing reps with somebody that is comparable to you, I'm not saying that individual reps on your own have no value. They do, but you're not going to rep out as well as you would if somebody's competing with you all the time. I think that's true of just about anything you do. And unfortunately, the model we have now is not as lucrative to doing that, because the more teams you have, the more tournaments you have, the more money is out there. And I think you're going to lose the development side. I think we've seen that over the period of 10 to 15 years. And that's happened throughout, high school and college athletics, not just softball. So, it's something that, people are trying to address, but it's certainly not trending in a good direction currently.
Yeah, because in the old school, in the old world of things, that most teams, you're only as good as your weakest link.
Mm-hmm.
And now, and I think that leads to, and you see it in college football, there's a lot of inconsistencies, because a lot of times everybody's not on the same page.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's an extremely tough model now.
Yeah.
I feel for those guys. You take a team like Alabama, for example, it didn't look very good. I'm not a football coach. I wouldn't even, remotely try to, diagnose what went wrong. But, you could guess that they're playing a team with 70 new players. They don't have which is unprecedented. I mean, there's not an era previous to that you would see a team like that. So you don't have a lot of film on those guys working together as a group. And I don't know if that's what caused them to have a poor week one performance. But that's certainly different. I would say that much. And then, I think it takes extra time, get those guys on the same time. In concurrent to all that, you're limited on how much you can work with the guys in the summer. With the NCAA restrictions, you're limited during the season. So, we have some of those limits too, but it's a lot more liberal than, the NCAA model, which helps us in terms of, creating some cohesiveness. And that also being said, they live in a world where, you've got collectives that can get in the ear of anybody, and it's not even illegal. So, that's a real challenge to coaches. I think that's why you're seeing some coaches that, like I told you guys before the show, I don't think any of those guys forgot how to coach. But it's a drastically different model. I feel for those guys, having to deal with that. I've been there. It's tough. And so, that's a model that I don't know that anybody really has their whole, head around yet. Because so much, I said on a show earlier today, I think there's probably been 50 years worth of changes in the last 5 to 7. And with that kind of radical change, anybody that says, yeah, I've got this figured out is kidding themselves. Because I don't. You've got to be really fluid and adaptable to the ever-changing model. Very, very difficult to walk into a place now and go, here's my 5-year plan, and I know exactly how it's going to go. I don't think anybody can say that because of everything that it is literally changing week to week, month to month. So makes it really difficult to be a coach at any level, but particularly at the highest right now for sure, because they're going to catch the brunt of that because that's where the money is. And unfortunately, the money is a big driving factor in what you're seeing out there today. Absolutely, and we could spend 7 shows on that, but I'll stop it while I'm ahead for sure.
Well, I want to ask you something about the young ladies on your team during the fall season. Who in the batter's box has become the most clutch player?
I think we're still, looking at that. I would just say there's a lot of kids that had good falls. Kylie Weston had a really good fall. She's certainly better than she was last spring. She's certainly better than she was the fall before that. I would say that's also true of Chloe Hatch. I mean, all of our players that returned have made strides, which is good to see. And I think a lot of our newcomers were better. Austin McNeese, for example, had one of her better days swinging the bat at UAH. And that was good to see. She's facing pitching that she hasn't seen yet, just like all the freshmen. Did a pretty good job. I thought Olivia Acuff made big strides throughout the fall. Emma Heineman, much better than she was. Francesca Lumps, another one, that came to us from Memphis, had played some at the D1 level, but it also battled some injuries, some coaching changes. Just like Emery Burke, both those kids had really good days, over at UAH. I thought they're swinging the bat better. So, at UAH, we had some freshmen that did some good things. Lorelei Sullivan we needed her to play center that day. She did a good job. Bree Wilson did a good job. They accounted for, I think 2 of our 3 runs. Did some good things with the small ball and the stolen base department that we hadn't seen as consistently up until that point. So, all those guys, I feel like we've got a collective group that can do a lot of things. Savannah Cantrell definitely turned it on the second half of the fall. We did some live stuff today. She looked really good. So, I think as far as offense, it's tough when you're facing for 10 innings kids that you will not face, during junior college. And, I think there's many of those kids that I named and others that can do that eventually. But that's why they're in junior college. That's why we're testing them the way that we are. So, you just want to see improvement. And, I think we're seeing that, and under some pretty, that's pretty tough road to hoe, this fall for sure.
Well, of course, going into the fall, your pitching staff's pretty solid. Is there a couple of players that kind of opened your eyes a little bit that's had a lot better falls than maybe you expected?
Yeah, I thought, Hallie Haynes was one, not saying we didn't think we wouldn't have signed her if we didn't think she was any good, but, for her to make the leap, that was somebody that was, she's pitched kind of here and there, on some travel teams, high school. She wasn't really a frontline kid per se. We thought we saw something, with her stuff that could really help in year one as a reliever, and then possibly be a frontline kid in year two. But that being said, she's still facing, we're really throwing her into the fire against the teams we played this fall. She did a really good job. We think she's going to be kind of a middle kid right now. It's a really good left-handed curveball in on righties. And as the changeup continues to develop, we can, use that in other ways and extend innings for her. But I thought she did a really good job. I thought, Addie obviously, did a really good job, against some really good teams. We've got to continue to, get some of her secondary stuff to work. Maybe when it's not, her best day, because her best day obviously is really good. Being able to pitch when you don't have your primary stuff is something you learn with time. I think she's still learning that. She did a nice job, and Skylar Branch really did a good job in some tight spots against some good teams. But overall, pleased with our pitching. Obviously, the numbers kind of showed that. I felt like, we got contributions at times from everybody, and then we've got some things that, we've still got to learn to do. Pitching it with a staff is new to a lot of them. When we're using 8, you're looking at probably 2 or 3 that are going to carry you at least 2 times through. Then we got to dump it over to kind of the transitional artist in the middle. And then we've got, 2 that we feel like, maybe 3 that can close out games. So, those are things that will work to our advantage and hopefully take, a lot of the stress off any 1 or 2 pitchers, throughout the year, because it's a grind. And I don't care if you're talking about high school or the SEC, everybody hits now. So it's not the game it was 15 years ago when you're looking at 1-0, 2-1. It's an offensive game. You see that at the highest levels. You see it at the lowest levels. So you've got to be able to pitch as a staff. That's something that, a lot of kids don't really come with an understanding of. That's something we certainly try to, put them in positions where they'll start, they'll be in the middle, they'll be on the back end, because that helps their development, helps us see what they have, and, allows our staff to be a little more versatile for sure.
Well, coaching, of course, another part of softball, of course, most people knows this, but not everybody. We lose him.
You probably got a phone call or a text coming.
Yeah, he got knocked off. Got him knocked. Yeah, I was fixing to ask him about the battery part of it, how we about to, because that's a huge part of softball, and some folks don't understand that. But your catchers has got to work with all those pitchers, and they've got to be on the same page, or you're not going to be successful. Naturally.
I've heard a lot of people say,
as long as you got to hear me.
Oh, yes, sir.
Yeah. What I was getting into, Coach, and folks that don't really maybe understand the game of softball or hear this often, many know this, the battery, which is the pitcher and catcher. You've got catchers that's got to work with 7 or 8 different pitchers, and and they have to be on the same page, because if they're not, you're not going to be successful.
I don't think he's got us, Phil.
Yeah. Okay. He's off.
Yeah. Speaking of, you was talking about the battery and all that. I've heard a lot of high school coaches saying, if you got a good pitcher and a good catcher, that's most of your defense right there, because they can take care of all that, control it all.
Yeah.
Hey, can you guys hear me? Sorry about that.
Yes.
I don't know what happened there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what I was asking is, and a lot of folks that may not know a lot about softball, and many of us that do, we understand this, is your battery. It's your pitcher and catcher. That's kind of, everything's kind of centered around that. So you've got catchers that's got to work with 7 or 8 different pitchers. They've got to all be on the same page. The communication's got to be there because, a lot of games are won in that battery.
Yeah, we're fortunate. We've got several catchers on the team that do a really good job. We recruited that way. We want to try and be 6 or 8 deep in the circle and at least 4 deep, behind the plate. And we're deeper than that on this team. But a lot of that is again the wear and tear aspect of those 2 positions. And we've got, Lump does a really good job, both offensively and defensively. Between Lump, Cantrell, and McCluskey, they do a really good job of controlling the run game. And then we've got a veteran with, Sophia Murphy that, has improved a lot as a blocker and a receiver. And she does a really good job for us in, with situational offense. She's been there, now in the program for her 2nd year. So those 2 or those 4, have kind of been in most of the mix. And we've got another 2 in Olivia Acuff and Emma Hyman that can do that. We just need them a little bit more at some spots in the dirt. And, they've done a good job, with that as well. But fortunate to be deep. And I think, Courtney does a good job, of getting a lot of time, with every catcher and the pitchers. So they have a good understanding of what their stuff does and doesn't do. We have some games and situations in the fall. We allow them to kind of call and run their own show. That helps them, establish a little bit more conviction in what they're trying to do. And it helps them learn the game. You can see in a Murphy, for example, she understands pitchers, especially the ones that have been here before, probably better than the newcomers, simply because of the time she's had in the system and with them. So that helps. And it also helps, kind of having that set of eyes and ears help some of the younger ones as well. So, all those are things that we didn't have a year ago because everything was brand new. All that's worked in a positive direction. And, Jimmy's kind of our, he does our catching, all our mechanics, the fundamental stuff. So we're fortunate on staff to have, multiple people that can help us for sure in each aspect of the game.
Well, Coach, I want to focus on some of the folks in the locker room, of course, on the bench and whatnot. Do you have certain players that are very vocal, very outspoken, and maybe sometimes are a little, do you have a player on the team that maybe likes to talk trash a little bit?
Not really. With us, we're not, they're competitive kids. Don't get me wrong. We really, I don't really like that a whole lot because it just takes away from what, we're trying to do. I just feel like, teams, I always felt like when I played, I didn't want to give anybody a reason to beat us that they didn't need. And 2, I was kind of the mindset, and any good team, great team I've ever been around, you're always looking for an extra edge anyway, to be competitive and get yourself in the mindset of where you need to go. And, our game is less emotional than I think people, train with it. We've got all the cheers, we've got all the stuff that, kind of, that's fine. But and a lot of times it expends energy and effort away from what we need in the moment to be better. And that requires some mental discipline. It requires, the ability to be where your feet are in the moment. And I feel like, especially in this day, the cameras being on you all the time, that gets lost. Because I say all the time, we're playing a 19th century game with 21st century people. And so you've got to change your teaching a little bit, knowing that's reality, but at the same time, it's still a 19th century game. And so, the game is the game, and we all have to be coaches, players, everybody adaptable enough to understand what the game is telling us to do when it's telling us to do it. So, with a lot of that other stuff, I enjoy, enthusiasm as much as somebody else, but I really want it directed on us. When things are good, on us, and when things are bad, on us. The other team, they may or may not do that. I don't really care. We're just there to try and collect 21 outs with a lead and win. And, if we're not, try to figure out where we're deficient and fix it as soon as possible and adjust to get back to momentum and go again with a lead. So, that's kind of my thought process on that for sure.
Yeah, so I guess in a sense you say, you want these young ladies to communicate, but you want it to be on a professional level.
Yeah, and the more we're about us, because you see it all the time in sports, in any sport, when moments are bad or things go against you, which is going to happen to every team. How you respond is that's the biggest tell of how a team is really going to do to maximize its value. And I think, the teams that are really good, when it's about them, especially when things are bad, and they circle around each other, that's the team that's going to be successful late. The team that thinks about the crowd or the umpires or the other team or all the external factors that can distract you from, what you've got to do when you've got to do it, that team will not, will not have success. And that's also true of us as coaches. It's tough for all of us because it's an emotional thing that we're all, vested in. And there's a time for that. And then there's a time for steadiness. And, there's no manual on this thing. You try to push buttons and go with what's the best you've got in front of you. But I think, that's a big thing for me is what are we doing with adversity? Are we focusing on external factors or are we, about us? And if you're about us, we're probably going to be successful. We pointed that out a couple of times during some adverse moments. We didn't do that very well at McNeese. I felt like, we were thinking about everything except, what was in front of us. Against La Tech, which was the next day, we did a really good job of that. There were multiple moments in that game where it could have broken out against us, and we stayed together and just simply, corrected what we needed to do in that moment and what the game told us to do. So I think, that's what we're preaching, with our team constantly. And hopefully I think for the most part, it's paying dividends.
Well, Coach, of course, these long road trips, and they're done purposely. For one thing, I know it helps the team kind of sort of grow together because they have to spend a lot of time together and they have to count on each other. Have you seen this team mature a lot over the fall season, not only on the field, but off the field?
Yeah, we've still got some room to grow there. And now the one thing I'll say about this team that's positive in that light, this is a group that really enjoys being around each other. We enjoy being around them, and they come to work doing what they need to do pretty much every day. There's some days are going to be better than others, but that's been pretty consistent. We are still fighting through, when moments are not good, does somebody just completely get into their own performance and tank, or do they fight through adversity? And this is something that we just don't do very well as a society. So we're still trying to get through that. I think we need to get better at that. We're going to continue to put them in situations where that's going to come up so that they have no choice, because when they're in the games, they're not going to have a choice. The game is going to, rain down what it does. So, I think those are things that, some of them are still working through. That's part of the maturity process. We've got to grow up a little bit with as many new faces as we have in those moments. But we're going to continue to put them in there and teach that and get better for sure.
And I'm sure with all this long road trip, the young ladies are excited about Thursday just to get to play, get up out of your own bed and get to go play a game in your backyard.
Yeah, I think so. It's difficult, when you're not, there's in the fall, particularly who we're playing, but the road is, when you're in a bus, it's difficult when every single time you're up, you're not just driving 3 miles, down the road to go play at your own place. So I'm looking forward to that because it's one last time to do that before we, get things rolling in the spring for sure. And I'm sure they are as well.
Well, Coach, I know you talked about a recruiting class come in. Are you allowed to talk about any of the players you've got coming in, maybe mention a couple of them or 3 of them and where they're from?
Not yet. We are actually we're real close. We're probably within 24 to 48 hours of finalizing all those LOIs. I would just
Okay.
simply say this. We've met every need, that we needed. It's changed a little bit in that our class is still, it's a full class, but we're leaving open some spots late because of the way things are going now. That's something we learned over the summer. The higher levels are at Division I, for example, is at a point where they're chopping rosters to 25. That's a process that's going to take the entirety of this academic year. So long story short, there's going to be a lot of people hunting for homes. Now, that doesn't mean that we've left 10 spots, but, we're looking at maybe, 3 to 4. We had 3 to 4, I think 3 bounced back last year. And we've always, whether we're in the transfer portal era or at junior college or any time I've been in college athletics, we've always utilized transfers, but we've utilized them as a piece, not a entire roster. I don't, and that may sound funny to people that are at a junior college, where we've got people coming in and out all the time. But whether I was in junior college or in the 4-year level, I think transfers are great, in pieces. If you can get 2 or 3 pieces that you don't have that can help your ball club be better. But I think where you get into trouble, and you're seeing a lot of this now, is when that is the entirety of your group. And that can be troublesome because now you've got a team of mercenaries and, sometimes you catch fire in a year. A lot of times you don't. But it is something that we've got to leave open because it is a reality now with the way things are in this drastically changing recruiting universe we're in.
Well, Coach, I guess too, you can be a lot more selective now that you've kind of sort of got a base and now you're recruiting, you can branch out more. And that's good there. Well, Coach, I want to ask you one more thing, and I want to turn you over to Howie. Your daughter, Rushton, she's growing up, and I've heard through the grapevine, she's kind of the girly girl, the princess type young lady. Has, raising her up and bringing her into the world and spending a lot of time with her, has it made you be a better softball coach in that you have a lot more compassion for these young ladies when you've got a daughter at home to have to deal with?
Yeah, I think, either way, I've got a gap between 2 kids. I've got a 15-year-old son who's knee deep in, basketball right now. And then, Rustin being 4, it's almost like you've got 2 generations of kids, even though, they're 11 years old or 11 years apart. The thing that's been interesting this time around is how much things have changed, in that, when he was a baby, social media was in its infancy. You didn't really have screens on your phone as much. That was, a little bit more similar to kind of a traditional way people were raising kids, at least from my own perspective. And now you really have to fight, to keep the phone out of their face. It's really advantageous. I feel like that, she's going to spend just about every afternoon, outdoors and around softball and not with that around and around the girls. So I think that's a big positive. A lot of them babysit for her from time to time. So, I think all those are good things for her. I view it as an advantage. I think it's relevant in the sense that a lot of the things that you're trying to do well in your family and around the house are also the same things that would be good, in terms of leadership as a coach. So I don't think those two are exclusive. I think they're, very similar. So, it's a little bit different perspective, with a 4-year-old girl, but very similar in the sense of where, Bobby was when he was that age. He was around the ballpark a lot too. I view it as really being grateful that that's the kind of lifestyle they have. Some people would, are more on, it keeps them kind of off schedule at times. It can be tough, on buses, but all that's been positive in our experience, and it's continued to be. I'm really grateful to the way our girls treat her. It's tough, man. When you've got a 4-year-old, sometimes she'll come into practice. I would be lying to you if there aren't distractions. But the girls handle that really well. I feel like they're good role models for her. And I'm grateful that she has them around because, whoever said it takes a village is absolutely correct. It certainly does in our case because there are times when both of us are on the field and, our time is not with her as much as maybe we'd want it to be. And, our players really, really set a good example. I'm real grateful for that for sure.
Does Rushton have a favorite player?
I think that just really varies on whoever babysat her last or whoever talked to her last. I mean, when you ask her,
Yeah.
that is what you'll get. It always has something to do with who was most recent.
Okay.
But they treat her very well, and she knows who all of them are. She knows a good bit about all of them, and I think that speaks volumes to how the players treat her. She likes being around them. So that those are all positives for us for sure.
Go ahead, Howie.
Coach, we appreciate your time today. We got another show coming up here in just a couple of minutes, and but we appreciate your time. But I do want to get out there that we had Dr. Campbell on last Thursday, and I put a little bug in his ear about turning that softball stadium into a dome where y'all could play year round.
Yeah, we can, we're certainly grateful. There's not a lot of presidents that would jump on a show and support the program as much as he has. Can't say enough about what he's done for us and continues to do. We don't have a dome, but it's about as close as you could get to it with the turf and the indoor that we have. It's very little that we can't get done. And I think that, speaks to his vision of what, a lot of that stuff was designed before I ever was hired here. And, I certainly appreciate the fact that he helped, allow Jimmy and I to kind of throw in our softball 2 cents. But, that stuff was in place before we ever got here. And I think they definitely did their homework on allowing us to, train as well as we can under just about any condition.
Yeah, he said he kind of, and I hope I ain't stepping on no toes when I say that. He said that he thought one of the reasons that you came was because of the new facilities and everything, the state of the art facility that you're working with now. That was one of the, I guess, closing points that helped your decision.
Yeah, there's no question about that, and no question. And if you're somebody that's vested in teaching development like we are, I mean, we've been at some places that, to me, when you see that and the kind of kid that you want that wants to get better sees what we have, then what it tells you behind the scenes is that there's support and they can do things to get better. You can look in the facility and see, I have an avenue to get better, whether you're with us or on your own. And I think, the legacy that Dr. Campbell will leave with those facilities has a lot to do with that. And it's not just softball. Soccer has that. Workforce development has that. Our medical programs have that. Our theater program has that. Our math science technology building has that. So I think he deserves a lot of credit in wanting, and as somebody that's kind of worked his way up from the bottom as an educator. He's been a teacher, he's been a dean, now he's running the school. And I think he's taken all those experiences and kind of rolled it into a finishing touch now that he has the ability to do that. And we certainly appreciate it. Our players appreciate it. The recruits that come in appreciate it. And that's just really good business on his part, for sure.
Yeah, we got a comment real quick before we get out here. Dana Hampton says, "I'm so thankful for North Alabama Community College." But I told Dr. Campbell before we let him go, I'm like, yeah, there's going to be a building named after you before you realize it. It'll be the Dr. Campbell History Building or something before it's all said and done.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot of, I'm not taking anything away from anybody that was president or led Northeast before he got there, but you can certainly see, some of those buildings that I just named, what he's done since he's been president. And, Phil's talked about that on the show and many others have. you could really pick a place. There are a lot of places where his legacy's been left, and we're just grateful that we've got some symmetry, with the leadership and people that want to do things right and want to be the best at what they do. And when that is at the top, it's going to make everybody else better. And I've been at places where that wasn't the case, and you're going to cause friction. It's not the case at Northeast. When I brought Jimmy in to see it for the first time, that was one of the things he first remarked to me. Is he goes, everybody speaks to each other here. You can tell they enjoy working here, and that just like any other good organization, that starts from the top. And we're just and it's not just him. I mean, every director that we have, I think is first class. And people help each other here. I don't have to worry about whether IT will help us, with cameras, or maintenance will help, and some of the things that we need there. And certainly we try to do the same for them. That's an atmosphere that he's created. He's hired good people. And it's it's just a good place to be every day. And outside of the school, in the community, it's a great place to be. So, we're just fortunate. We've been in a lot of places. We're real happy with, what we've done at Northeast and what we continue to do, and grateful for the opportunity Dr. Campbell's given all of us.
And the way he talks, he's not through either. He still has a vision out there of putting a lot of things into place, which is good. And we hope that continues on.
Yeah. I joke all the time, he needs to, live to be 100, man. Cause, I don't think, I'm not going to speak for Dr. Campbell, but I've never heard, retirement, come out of his mouth. Everything that, he usually is talking about is what's next. And, that fires all of us up, and, it's going to create, I think a willingness to succeed from the top on down, because things are not stagnant at Northeast. That was something that I got from the interviews, and it's certainly been the case, since I've had the job. So, that's appreciated on my end in spades.
Yeah. Coach, we appreciate your time. Everybody come out Thursday, watch the final fall game Thursday at 1:00 at Northeast Alabama Community College, and support these young ladies. Every player will be playing Thursday. It's going to be a regular game, but then part of the way through it goes into situational stuff. So if nothing else, it's going to be entertaining to watch, because you never know what's going to happen from inning to inning.
Absolutely. It'll be fun, and, get a chance to see all our kids, and, we're grateful for the opportunity. I appreciate you guys having us on for sure. Thank you for your support all year.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. We're going to take some time off, and then we're going to bring you back before the spring gets started back up. We'll get with you on the logistics on all that stuff, but we appreciate all these shows that you've done with us, and best of luck come Thursday. And as always, if there's anything we can do for you, just let us know.
All right. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Hey, thank you all. So for Phil Harris, I'm Howard Chaney, and our guest tonight, /star of the show, Coach Joe Guthrie of Northeast Alabama Community College, Lady Mustang. So go out and support them Thursday at 1:00. Good night, everybody.